Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are really zooming in on urban transformation in action. We're looking at Nuns Island, or Ile de Sceaux, in Montreal, a place that's, well, historically been known as this affluent, kind of secluded bedroom community.
hmm And now it's undergoing this radical, very accelerated shift. It's aiming to become a dense metropolitan hub.
And it's not a subtle change, is it? It's a total redefinition.
Oh, not at all. We've been digging into the official documents, the urban planning reports, specifically the updated Special Urban Planning Program, or PPU.
Okay, so the PPU, that's basically the island's new rulebook for development for the next, what, decade?
Exactly. And our mission today is pretty straightforward.
We want to unpack how the new REM light rail station is really the catalyst for all of this, and what the numbers, the hard data from these planning documents, what they tell us about the final vision for the island.
And we have to start with the real shock factor here, because the official vision just throws out the island's historical population limits.
Okay, so there was a limit before.
Oh, yeah. For decades, the plan had this theoretical ceiling of around 25,000 inhabitants. That was the number everyone thought the infrastructure could handle.
25,000. And where is the island right now in 2025?
They're basically already there. Population estimates put them somewhere between 22,500 and 23,000. So they're already knocking on the door of that old ceiling.
But the new PPU isn't just knocking on the door.
It's blowing the ceiling right off.
So what's the new number? What's the new ceiling?
The full deployment of this updated PPU, it's projected to push the population to nearly 30,000 residents. And that's by the 2030 to 2035 horizon.
30,000. Wow. I mean, that's a massive jump. It's almost 50% growth from the 2016 numbers, all crammed onto a pretty small island.
It's an astonishing level of density, especially for a place that, always prided itself on a certain tranquility.
Right.
But what's so fascinating is that the municipality isn't trying to slow this down. They're actively chasing it.
So they're framing it as a good thing.
They're framing it as a necessary strategic response to this new reality, which is the REM line. They see the REM as both the justification for the growth and, critically, the pressure relief valve for all those new people.
Okay, let's unpack that strategy then. You don't just add, 7,500 people without a very specific method. There has to be an urban logic to this.
And the logic is all centered on one concept, TOD.
Transit-oriented development.
Exactly. The PPU focuses all of its densification on the 79-hectare north sector. That's the area with the old Place du Commerce. And the goal is simple. Build vertically, build densely, right around the new REM station.
And the idea there is twofold, right? You maximize public transit use and you minimize the traffic chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And that second point is just so critical for Nuns Island. I mean, it's an island. It has very few ways on and off. You've got the Strathier roundabout, the bridge access.
Huge bottlenecks, exactly. So the residential numbers here are high. The plan calls for adding at least 4,000 new housing units.
Mostly condos and mixed-use buildings, I assume.
Right. And based on standard metrics, that's what gets you the 5,500 to 7,500 new residents we're talking about.
To fit 4,000 units on that footprint, we have to be talking about some serious verticality. We're not talking about mid-rise anymore.
No, and this is what the PPU proudly calls the metropolitan signal. Right near the REM station, the new zoning allows for buildings between 12 and, well, a staggering 30 stories.
30 stories.
Yeah. And while it does taper down as you get closer to existing homes, that intense verticality right at the transit hub is very deliberate policy.
And this all hinges on the REM. The whole thing is justified by the train. What are the mobility numbers the city is betting on?
The station itself is engineered for huge capacity. Projections say it'll handle between 3,000 and 5,000 daily trips just during peak hours.
And it's that 6-minute ride to downtown Montreal. That's the key.
That's the whole justification. The assumption is if you can get downtown that fast, that reliably, you just don't need to own or use a car every day.
And this isn't just about housing. The plan is also a major economic transformation. That Place du Commerce area, it's always had that, 1980s strip mall feel.
Big surface parking lots, low buildings.
Right.
Well, that model is now officially obsolete. The PPU mandates turning those old shopping centers into modern, mixed-use buildings.
So ground floor shops with apartments or offices stacked on top.
Exactly. And that's expected to bring in huge economic benefits, more property tax revenue, obviously, and up to 120,000 square meters of new commercial space shops, offices, clinics.
And the city is putting its money where its mouth is. The documents say Montreal is planning to invest over $50 million in infrastructure just to support this.
That's right. New sewers, water mains, reconfiguring roads, all over the next decade.
I have to ask, though, is there any concern in the documents that this is basically public money subsidizing density for high-end developers in what's already one of Montreal's wealthiest areas?
That is a major tension point. The city's argument is that these upgrades are necessary anyway, but critics are pointing out that the scale of this investment, $50 million, is only really justified by the promise of massive tax revenue from all those new luxury high-rises.
So it solidifies that this is a huge municipal strategy to generate both housing and, well, a lot of cash.
Absolutely.
Now, before we get to the friction this all creates, we have to talk about the history here. Because when you hear 30-story towers, you picture a quiet suburb being ruined. But Nuns Island was never really that.
That's a myth that really needs to be broken. It was never a traditional suburb. It was always designed for height. The whole vision was towers in a park.
And the sources have this fascinating historical connection. The first big towers on the island, back in the 60s and 70s, were 15 stories high. And they were the direct legacy of one of the greats, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe.
Precisely. In its early days, Nuns Island was a global laboratory for modern architecture. It already has, between 45 and 50 major towers of 12 stories and up? Height is in its DNA.
Okay, so if it already has 50 towers, how are these new projects, the ones hitting 30, even 40 stories, how are they different architecturally?
It's the scale. The scale is dramatically different. The classic towers were, 15, maybe 20 stories. They were elegant, restrained. This new ways, like the Evolo and Symphonia projects, they're aiming so much higher.
The average is now 30 to 37 stories.
And that's the average. The tallest one in the documents, Symphonia VIU, hits 43 stories. This is ultra density. It goes way beyond what the original modernist planners ever conceived of.
So with that kind of height, 43 stories next to a sidewalk, how does the plan even try to manage the human scale? How do you avoid that oppressive canyon effect?
That's where the commercial podiums come in. The PPU is really specific here. It mandates that the base of these massive towers has to be made of these commercial structures, usually 2 to 4 stories high.
So when you're walking on the street, you're not looking straight up a 40-story wall.
That's the goal. You're looking at a 2 or 3-story building with shop windows and doors. It keeps that street-level experience pleasant, more traditional for the pedestrian.
So the density is way up high, but the ground level feels approachable. And that brings us to the other half of the island's DNA, the green space. The vision was towers in a park. How do they densify without sacrificing that?
Well, the island's commitment to nature is really remarkable. Historically, about 30 to 40% of the whole island is dedicated to protected green space.
And the jewel in that crown is the Domaine St. Paul.
The Woods, as it's often called. It's a 26-hectare wet forest. To give you a sense of scale, that's like 36 football fields. It's a classified exceptional forest ecosystem, and it's untouchable.
Okay, so here's the fundamental tension. How do you add 7,500 new people and still preserve that commitment to nature? They're promising more parks, but where does the space come from?
They're finding it by getting rid of private asphalt.
Parking lots.
Exactly. The PPU commits to adding 3.5 hectares of new public space parks, squares, a big riverside park, to the 9 hectares already there in the north sector. The trade-off is this. They're targeting vacant lots and those huge surface parking lots.
So they're replacing private parking with two things: inhabited concrete, the towers, and public green spaces.
That is the core argument. This massive vertical densification is actually paying for and enabling the conversion of ugly private asphalt into accessible public green space.
But there's a catch, I'm sure.
There's a huge challenge because while the total park space goes up to 12.5 hectares, it's going to be so much more heavily used by 30,000 residents. The success of this whole idea depends on that new park space being incredibly high quality so it can withstand all those new users.
Okay, we have to talk about the friction points now, because this kind of transformation creates serious social pressure. Let's start with the social balance.
With all the new families coming in, 2 challenges jump out immediately. First, education. The PPU actually sets aside space for a new primary school.
Which they have to do. The existing schools must be full.
They're already saturated, so ignoring the school problem would make the whole plan ethically impossible.
And the second challenge, the one every big development in Montreal faces.
Affordable housing. specifically meeting the city's bylaw for a diverse metropolis.
Right, the 2020 rule. 20% social housing, 20% affordable.
Correct. So for every 100 units a developer builds, 40 of them have to meet those non-market targets.
But on Nuns Island, where prices per square foot are already through the roof, that sounds almost impossible.
It is. The sources are very clear about this. The cost of land and construction there makes financing non-market units incredibly difficult. The city is trying to negotiate land deals, but the documents basically admit this will be one of the toughest places in the whole city to hit those targets. The entry price is just too high.
But even with those issues, the number one friction point, the thing that residents fear will cause total asphyxiation, has to be traffic.
Oh, absolutely. The fear is that adding 7,500 people will just completely paralyze the Strathyre roundabout and the access to the Champlain Bridge. And this is where we get to the core of the bold urban planning gamble.
Okay, so what is this high-stakes bet the city is making?
It's a deep behavioral gamble. They are betting that the REM, this huge, high-quality public transit option, will fundamentally outweigh the influx of new residents. They're betting it will force a massive reduction in solo car use.
They're betting that the convenience of the train will actually break people's driving habits.
Deeply ingrained driving habits, that's the gamble.
But has that ever really worked? Has transit alone ever been enough to change a community's car culture, especially one that's been car-dependent for 50 years?
Well, that is the ultimate test here. The plan assumes that the new residents, the ones attracted by the REM, will just be less reliant on cars. But if that assumption is even a little bit wrong,
If a big chunk of those 7,500 new people still need their cars for groceries, for weekend trips,
then the Strathyre access point will probably seize up. It'll paralyze the neighborhood. That's why it's a gamble, not a guarantee.
so the whole goal is what they call a more sustainable tranquility, a place where you can live and shop and travel without having to rely only on your car.
Right. Moving from that old suburban logic where you had to drive just to get milk to a complete integrated metropolitan environment.
We're watching this island evolve from a place defined by its limits to one defined by, well, aggressive verticality and connectivity.
That's the story.
This has been an incredibly detailed deep dive. We've seen Nuns Island move from a 25,000 resident ceiling to a 30,000 resident metropolitan target. And the central tension is still there. Can they keep that unique island quality of life while chasing this ultra-vertical growth?
And that really leads to the final thought that you, whether you're a resident or just an urban planning nerd, really need to consider. The island's unique identity, as it's defined in these sources, is the marriage of two extremes. On one hand, you have vertical ultra-density towers pushing 40 stories.
And on the other,
Strict ecological conservation, that incredibly sensitive 26-hectare forest, the Domaine St. Paul.
it's an almost impossible combination, a contradiction.
And the ultimate test of this plan's success, it won't be about the number of units built or the tax revenue. It will be whether this massive acceleration of height ultimately creates an inhabited park, which was the original elegant modernist vision, or does the sheer scale of the population just overwhelm the green spaces, turning the island into a vertical dormitory? Highly connected by rail, sure, but lacking that balance with nature that gives the island all its value. That's the question that will define the next decade for Nuns Island.